In this video, we're going to take a look at a lot of tools that I had to install in order to get the Chartbrew dashboard up and running, as we looked at in another video. And this is all being done on a Windows 10 machine, so keep that in mind. If you're using a Mac or a Linux machine, your steps will be slightly different. In the upper right, I'm showing a list of installed tools such as Docker Desktop, Git, the GitHub CLI, of course Google Chrome, Heroku, the Heroku CLI, Microsoft VS Code, and the Windows subsystem for the Linux update. And so the first set of screens here on the left side is showing the Git For Windows installation. I won't go through all the screens, but there are quite a few, and I pretty much just chose the default settings as it went through these screens. I did change the repositories to be named main, as you see there, and I chose the recommended setting here as far as adjusting the environment path. I went ahead here and selected this first option. Check out Windows style, commit Unix style line endings, and several other screens here. I will mention the Git Credential Manager. That is important to have it installed because it is used, depending on what you're doing, for authenticating with the GitHub repositories. So I went ahead and selected the Git Credential Manager, as you can see here. Once you go through those steps, it takes probably a minute or two, depending on your computer speed, maybe longer. And then once it's done, you see here, I went ahead and had it launch a Git Bash window, and then it pulls up this release screen for the Git for Windows. I'm using version 2.37.2. And as you can see here, it opens up a Git Bash terminal, which we will end up using that in a moment. The next thing I did was to clone the Chartbrew code. As you saw in the previous video, in order to get the Chartbrew front end and back end up and running, I went ahead and used the Chartbrew repository in GitHub. So this is the command line here, where you can see that I did my git clone. And as I mentioned in a previous video, because of the requirements currently stated on the Chartbrew website, I went ahead and used the NVM to switch to an older version, 14.20.0. You may or may not need to do that, but I did it for the purposes of this video. So here in this screen, you can see where I said NVM use 14.20.0. And then you can see in the next screen here that it shows now using Node version 14.20.0. And you can see the list that I have 16.16.0 and 14.20.0 as far as Node goes, using the NVM for Windows command. And I did cover that in a previous video about how to install the NVM for Windows. It's a pretty important tool to have when doing this type of work. So at this point, we have a copy of the code, and we will be using that in another video soon as far as the local version of the code running in VS Code. Another thing I did was to create a Heroku account. And so in order to do that, it's good to create a Heroku dashboard account and also install the Heroku CLI, which is what this section is talking about here. Now there was a few steps that I did slightly differently, and I highlighted them here that I mentioned. I already set these up earlier. Because I did the clone that I showed just a minute ago, and I also set up the Heroku database, the MySQL database. Once I created the Heroku account, I went ahead and created the free add-on for the MySQL database. And so I didn't run these two steps here, as it's shown here in the instructions from the Chartbrew website. You can see that right here. There is an article on Chartbrew, how to deploy Chartbrew on Heroku and Vercel. So I did slightly alter my approach to it, which is what I'm talking about in this video. So as it says here, how to deploy Chartbrew on Heroku and Vercel. I wanted to go ahead and get that step out of the way for the Chartbrew dashboard. And there is a Heroku login that you can see here, and that prompts you through a series of screens. Again, it depends on exactly how you want to implement this on your systems. Another thing that will need to be done we'll be setting up some environment variables, and those are listed in another section here. So at this point, you should have your Heroku account created, and you'll get some emails and to confirm your account and things like that. So once you have that set up, go ahead and set up your MySQL database, and you will have a list of database parameters that we're going to need. This little section here talks about the Heroku CLI, and it is found on the Heroku.com website. I also added a couple notes here. I did install a Heroku plugin, which we'll see that momentarily. That allows me to choose the backend server folder and also get it set up for hosting the Chartbrew backend on Heroku. So that will become important also. You'll find on the website just shown above a program here called installing the Heroku CLI on Windows. I chose the 64-bit installer since I have a 64-bit machine. And so these next screens just show what happened as it was installing the Heroku CLI. I chose all the default options here to add it to my path and so forth. And then you'll get the Heroku setup was successful. And I did go ahead after doing that and I restarted my Git Bash command prompt windows that I had to open so that it could get the new path environment variables. And so I just listed a few screenshots here of running some commands such as Heroku -v for the version, and you can see it did in fact install Heroku 7.53.0 for my environment. And another screen you'll see when going through this process will be this Heroku login. It wants you to authenticate to the Heroku account. So if you type Heroku login, then it's going to tell you this message: press any key to open up the browser to log in or Q to exit. And so the next screens I'll show go through that process of the types of screens that you'll see when you're authenticating to the Heroku account. So lastly, once you do that, you'll see a screen like this that says another version of Heroku is available from 7.53 to 7.62, but I'm not going to worry about that for the purposes of this video. So let's take a look at some other screens here that you may see when you're doing the Heroku login. Here is a screen that says, hey, let's go ahead and log into the Heroku CLI. If you weren't already logged into the Heroku website, it will make you authenticate. I already was, so then I saw this screen that says I'm logged in, and you can go ahead and close that page in the browser. And lastly, as you can see here, it says logging in done, logged in as Mr. Dashboard at my Gmail account. So once you've got that far, you know that this Heroku CLI is logged in, and you could start issuing commands to Heroku from your command line. Again, it depends on how you want to go about doing this, if you use that or not, but I wanted to walk through that process. Next, I was going to show a few things about the code. In VS Code, I did add just a basic file for testing permissions to make sure everything was hooked up. And then I wanted to push it up to my public GitHub repo, and that is a fork of the public Chartbrew repo. And that is when my Windows Git Credential managers got invoked. And here you can see some of the screens that you would see in doing this process. I ran a git status command, so you can see here our branch is master. It's up to date with origin master. There's nothing to commit. I hadn't made a change yet. And then you can see my remote shown there. So here's a screen showing confirming your access to your GitHub repo, which will need to be done when you're connecting these pieces together. So you have to type in your password on your GitHub account. And I did have to go ahead and add a couple Git configuration commands here for my email and username. I had forgot to do that originally, so I went ahead and added them. It wouldn't let me do my commit. And then lastly, here in this screen, you can see that I added the test file that I mentioned right here, just to make sure all my permissions and everything were all set up before going any further with this process. So here is the code actually opened up in VS Code. You can see here in this window the directory I was in. In my case, it was in a directory called Chartbrew. And so there is the code that was downloaded from the Chartbrew repo, and you can see there is a client folder and there's a server folder. So that would be the client side and the server side that you heard me talk about in the other video when doing all of this setup. So at this point in the process, we have a lot of the tools installed that we will need to proceed further. We have our command line tools installed, we have our GitHub connected, we have our Heroku account connected, and we have our code downloaded from the Chartbrew GitHub repository that I have a copy of here and will be using in a future video to do the final configuration of the Chartbrew STRAPI plugin.
If you like this channel, please like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when I post new content.